I'm David Hazard, author, publishing consultant, and founding director of Ascent, an international prep school for authors. We help aspiring writers to develop their books from concept to finish. We develop cover designs and page designs, and we help authors launch their careers in publishing. I'm here today to talk with one of my clients, Peter Schmitt, about his historical novel, Gabriel's Redemption. Peter, it's great to be here with you today. I was fascinated by your novel as you developed it, and because it's a wonderful weaving together, really, of two storylines. One is the story of an American serviceman in the theater of war in Europe during World War II. And the other storyline takes us through a very tragic event involving a young black man and a white woman, the wife of the man who's away at war. So I have to ask, what inspired you to write this novel?
Well, I was looking for a second. I had finished my first book, and I was looking for a second story to write. And a dear friend of mine, Reba Barley, told me about this story she had heard as an adolescent. And she had overheard her mother and a friend talking about a woman in town. And the true story takes place in 1944, where a woman was allegedly having a consensual affair with an African-American man.
And this is in Virginia, in the rural Virginia South.
Yes, in 1944.
In 1944.
Yes.
All right, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And among the African-American community, it was common knowledge that it was a consensual affair. Among the white community, it was gossiped about a little bit. At some point, something happened, and she accused him of rape. He was arrested, tried, and electrocuted in roughly 6 weeks. And all of these people who knew that this was most likely a consensual affair stood by and watched. And I thought, I can understand the times and that sort of thing, but still, the story kind of pierced me, and I began checking into the court records, the contemporary newspaper accounts, and then I began interviewing people who were alive at that time. So once I had all the facts lined up, I began writing a fictional adaptation of it and trying to figure out how this could have happened. In the course of interviewing some of these people, one African-American woman who was willing to talk to me about it told me she had heard that had the husband been at home when this happened, he would have spoken up for the African-American man. And I thought, wow, there's the novel.
Yeah, so a husband who knows that his wife is having an affair says that he would have spoken up for her. And the magnification, the thing that makes that even more important, is it would be a white man speaking up on behalf of a black man in 1944 in Southern America.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I had come to find out there had been a lynching in the county only 6 years before. This took me in a different direction. I had to begin thinking, how could this husband come to this point? It would be a large stretch for me to get there. And so I had to start thinking what would drive him to do that. And so it became then almost a separate story about his obsession and his need to save lives and to do things to their utmost. He lives by a credo that there's nothing you can't do if you don't, if you try hard enough. Well, in the theater of war, and the randomness and the horror, he's a medic. It's pretty obvious that there are lots of things that happen that he can't help, no matter how hard he tries. And this pretty much begins to strain him to the breaking point.
So what I love is the complexity, the layers that you have built into this novel. You've got a husband who is away at war, so he's got distance, he's got time, he can't communicate. He learns that his wife has been caught in a relationship with a black man, so he becomes well aware of what could happen. And it's a wonderful setup because you showed us this character you've created, Gabriel, who is trying very hard and finding himself powerless to save as everyone that he's having to help as a medic in World War II, and is also confronted with his helplessness about something that's happening back at home. I mean, what a great psychological setup for a novel. You've done a brilliant job here.
Thank you.
I want to ask, did you find in your research anything unusual or particularly interesting that you would like to tell us about?
Well, just lots of things. I mean, the way the criminal justice system worked at that time, I came to find out, for instance, that the police had a stack of pre-signed warrants. All they had to do was fill in. I had found that just life as an African American, about having to walk on the other side of the street. I knew all of those things, but I had a certain naivete about it. It became much different when I was really faced with the real situation. In talking, there were very few members of the African American community that were willing to talk to me about it. It was still a very difficult story. I had to learn nomenclature. How did African Americans refer to themselves in those times? Those times they were colored people and they were Negroes. To be called black at that time was actually meant that you were a thug. It's interesting to see how that's changed, but those were all things that I hadn't expected in the beginning as I began looking, and all of a sudden I was like, wow. And I guess the other thing was I had no idea of the amount of fear that was there in the African American community. At first I was a bit outraged that no one would stand up, but it became pretty clear why they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a real reality check for myself about a lot of things, about human nature. When I interviewed a white woman who was friends with the woman, I came to find out that I asked her, well, you knew what was going on. Why didn't you say something? And her answer was, well, it wasn't any of my business. And I thought, wow, isn't that human nature, And I thought, it should have been your business. It should have been all of our business. And maybe that's what the book was written for.
Mm-hmm. You're writing about an event. You've taken a real life event, a horrible injustice that happened in the 40s, and here we are only 70 years later, and with just a little bit of hindsight, we can look back and see how attitudes changed for someone at that time to say, I didn't speak up because it was none of my business. For people living in a community who were just in utter terror because they probably knew that the police just had stacks of pre-signed warrants and they could walk in and pick them up at any time they wanted to for any charge. I think that's very difficult for us to look at as Americans. And yet you've done us a great service by reminding us that we're not that far past those types of behaviors and those types of attitudes. I want to ask you this question, Peter. In the many years, almost 35 now, that I have been coaching authors, I have often witnessed that as someone is writing a book, they're focused in one way on the creation of a new book, a new manuscript, but they also can go through some personal changes and development while they're writing. Was that true for you?
No, absolutely. I was after the book came out, I was contacted by two groups in Winchester, very similar. One is the Justice Coalition, and the other one was the Coalition of Racial Unity. Both of them interested in the story, and as I got to meet with these folks, I realized this is exactly what I was talking about. And so I've become involved with them. There are a couple cases that we're monitoring and hoping to reverse. There were cases of just outrageous sentences for relatively minor crimes. And so it just gave me a reality check. And I thought, I've written the book. If I'm going to walk the walk, talk the talk, I should walk the walk. And so I would never imagined, 6 or 7 years ago, that I would be involved with something like that. Again, it was a certain naivete.
So it was a life-changing experience for you in some ways.
In some ways, yes.
Yeah. Peter, if there's one thing that you would like to leave your readers with when they finished reading your novel, Gabriel's Redemption, what would that be?
Well, I didn't mean to disparage the community or disparage anyone in writing the book. I wanted this to be sort of a lesson in human nature and a lesson in how things were and how things sometimes are. And I also want to realize that, particularly with social injustice, it affects many, many people in many different ways, none of them very good. And so I would hope that the take-home message from the book is, if you see it happening and you think it's wrong, speak up. You can make a difference. Someone certainly would have made a difference in this young man's life.
Peter, thank you for the great contribution that you've made by holding up a case that in which someone died in an unjust way, reminding us that this can happen, and that as human beings, we have an obligation to each other. And I want to thank you for just writing a great page-turning novel.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for having me here today.
I've been here today talking with Peter Schmitt about his novel, Gabriel's Redemption. You can find Peter online at peterschmittbooks.com. This is David Hazard, founding director of Ascent, a prep school for authors. If you have need of coaching services, product design and development services, or marketing services, find us on the web at itsyourlifebethere.com.